Welcome to the Organ Podcast from the Royal College of Organists with me, Mark O'Brien. Coming up, I'll be talking to Anne Marsden-Thomas and Ghislaine Rees-Trapp about their Oxford Book of Organ Music by Women Composers, where they talk about some of the extraordinary things that women had to put up with in order to get their compositions published. And I talked to Richard Gowers, former King's College organ scholar, about the route he's taking in building his career. But before all that, the organ at Bristol Cathedral has often been hailed as one of the finest examples of an English romantic organ, but is also very much feeling its age. And so in January of this year, it was completely dismantled and taken up to the Harrison and Harrison workshop in Durham for a major restoration. Well, just before it was switched off for the last time, I met the cathedral's director of music, Mark Lee, up in the organ loft to find out what work needs to be done and why this is such an important instrument.
It's a real craftsman-built instrument, absolutely glorious, from the golden era of Walker's. So we're definitely going to miss it, but, tinged with the bright thought that when it comes back, it's actually going to work properly, which it really hasn't done for quite a long time. So.
And that's the point. You're talking about the golden age of Walker's. So we're talking 1907 when they built it, really, I assume.
Yes, I mean, it really is. I was going to say a new instrument from 1907. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of pipe work from previous incarnations. So this was originally a Vowles instrument.
Now that's a local. I mean, they're not very well known, are they? Vowles. It's mainly West Country.
It is pretty much West Country. Very good Victorian builder, generally regarded as a quality company. They were responsible for the organ before Walker's. So what Walker's would have found would have been Vowles, 3-manual, sort of fairly standard, moderately early sort of Victorian style, and they really came in and completely revamped it. So the reeds are all new, they're all Walker 1907, and a lot of the romantic flutes and things of that type.
But prior to that, Vowles would have inherited how much from the original Renatus Harris organ? Because the case, which is now under the scaffolding, that's the original 1685 Harris case.
Yep.
Any pipes that you've still got here?
Yeah, so anything in the case, any of the visible pipe work is part of the case and from 1685. So those are Harris pipes, and they do all after a fashion. Speak, because obviously they're extremely old. So they form parts of the great small open diapason and small principal.
So it's old.
It's old.
And the problem that you're facing now, hence the rebuild, is that it's beginning to show its age.
Well, it is. It's a bit like a sort of vintage Bentley from the same sort of year, I suppose. So it's wonderful. It sort of reeks of history, and you take it out on sunny days and enjoy it. What you really don't do with it is sort of thrash it up and down the motorway every day or take it to Sainsbury's. And that is obviously what a cathedral organ has to do. This organ is played, I don't know, I wouldn't like to hazard a guess how many hours a week, but it's a lot. So it gets a lot of hard use, and really for its very ancient original tubular pneumatic action, it just is too much. And there are some design issues about the action as well.
So you're having to hold back. I mean, in terms of services, is it quite frustrating or quite nerve-wracking for you and the team here when you're playing at services to think, oh God, are we going to get through this?
Well, it can be like that. I mean, it goes in phases. So as is typical with tubular pneumatic action, it's very, very much affected by temperature and therefore humidity. That has an immediate impact on it. So yeah, absolutely. You may well come in one day and find that a stop's not working, or even the basic everyday things like the swelter grate, it can be incredibly unreliable. You're getting whole couplings just completely missing.
Well, we're sitting right here at the console. Yeah. I mean, can you show us sort of the things you have to put up with, or we switch it on?
Okay, there'll be a nasty whine when it starts because I think there's a leak somewhere inside, but it does sort of rectify itself. So if you hear that, that's what it'll be. There we go.
Oh gosh, it's
like slightly ghostly noise.
But impressive nevertheless that we're talking pneumatic action. I mean, those thin, they're lead pipes, but are nearly 120 years old.
They are, yes. I mean, it's amazing that it works at all. There are thousands of metres of lead piping around the inside of the instrument. That is all going. Yep. It's going to become electropneumatic. Harrisons are are working very hard together with our advisor William McVicker on making sure that it still has the same feel, so that there's quite a high degree of top resistance. It's a little bit like playing a harpsichord. There's a little click at the start of the note, which is very much a built-in feature that we like.
So that's in the console itself?
It is, yeah. So that's going to be preserved. So it'll still feel the same. And then, of course, the other thing about converting tubular pneumatic to electro-pneumatic is, of course, the response from key to pipe is much, much quicker. So the pipe work on this instrument is slow of speech. It's typical Edwardian pipe work. It kind of warms into its sound, rather wonderfully. And obviously the action is quite slow. I mean, the speed of the action depends on how far away the pipes are from the console. So the further away you go, the further the little puff of air has to move through the lead tubing, and therefore the slower the response is. So actually getting the instrument to speak together is a challenge in its own right. But obviously you can't suddenly have pipes that have been used to a slow method of speech suddenly firing into action immediately. It completely ruins the speech of the pipe. It sort of pops into action.
So you've got to then, Harrison's have to revoice anyway.
Well, they won't be revoicing.
Slightly.
Yeah, they're actually building that into the action. So obviously there won't be a delay that you can feel, but they're being very attentive to the way that the pipes were designed to speak.
So the new action is compensating for the speed of the pipes rather than the other way around.
Yeah, it's a little bit of give and take, so that the speech of this instrument isn't compromised at all.
Well, give us a show what it does before you switch it off for a very long time.
Okay, well, as ever, I've got the wrong shoes on, but that's fine. I mean, organists always say that, don't they? That's a standard line. There's a huge array of wonderfully varied 8-foot stops.
I mean, this is it. It's a very heavy 8-foot bass for this. And
it
that
is,
must give it that romantic sound.
Well, it does. It gives lots of wonderful variety for accompanying, and exactly. And the choice is fabulous. I mean, on the grate, you've got 3 open diapasons.
Well, let's hear them.
Small, medium, and large. So here's the small one, which has some Harris material in it. So that's a little bit of something of the period. Beautiful stop, and very, very soft. Not much more than a great Dulciana, really. Incredibly quiet. And the medium, a little bigger. It's not speaking terribly well. It's a little bit uneven. And
you were saying to me earlier when we were downstairs.
Yeah.
Because of the condition of this organ, there are some stops that, in your long career here, you've never heard.
Yes, well, certainly some pipes, yes, absolutely. So, I mean, for example, great double open diapason, absolutely beautiful stop, wonderful, sort of rich, stringy tone. So if I play chromatically down the bottom octave, I think this is probably where we'll end up. So this is sort of tenor C going down. That should be A flat. That should be F sharp. That should be F. That should be E. E flat's there. That should be D. Oh, and bottom C's off as well.
That's collapsed pneumatic pipes, isn't it?
Yes, almost certainly. The difficulty is that the action coupled with the inaccessibility of the pipework means that it's never been repaired. It's never really been cost effective to do it.
And what's your favourite? What are you going to remember most about this organ? What sort of sound do you really love and you think, aha, that's the Bristol organ?
There are lots of wonderful things. I mean, the chorus is fabulous. Just the whole sort of full organ sound is very, very exciting. I'll bring a little bit of tuba in as well, just to help it along. I know it's go crazy. So sort of. Wonderful chorus, but I mean, one of the things that shows the quality of this instrument is that it's also absolutely fantastic at MF, which is the area when I think organs really often expose their weaknesses. That does it have that fantastic sort of beautiful singing tone, and it really does. It's just absolutely wonderful. wonderfully musical sound, and just adding a little bit more to it as well. So it's a very incisive sound, really, really wonderful. And that wasn't even with the big open diapason. Bright chorus, and then of course you have all the lovely solo colours as well. Wonderful oboe. I mean, it's a classic English solo. It's 2 strings, 2 flutes, 8 and 4, clarinet, oboe, tuba. That's a classic English solo. And clarinet. Wonderful harmonic flutes, absolutely glorious, sort of Cavaille Cole really. And if you really want to go French, I mean, these solo strings with sort of biting quality. I mean, a big contrast to the swell strings, which are much sweeter, milder. Almost inaudible at low volume, and then the tuba, of course. With tromba on the stop knob, nobody really knows why. The pipes all have tuba engraved on them, but somewhere in 1907 the communication got lost.
Are you hoping there'll be a slight element of revoicing? Would there be a better blend, or are you keeping this exactly as it sounds now in that sense?
Well, the intention and the understanding of the restoration from all parties is that the sound of this organ must be preserved exactly as it is. So obviously it'll be freshened because the pipework's very dirty. It'll be thoroughly cleaned out. So it'll be a sort of fresh interpretation, but absolutely the same sound, because I think these glorious Walker organs, I mean, there just aren't that many. There are hardly any which are really untouched, exactly as Walker left them. I think this organ has been very lucky. It avoided serious restoration in the 60s, so it still has an English choir, hasn't been turned into a positif, nothing has changed. It still has its original romantic ideas. You'd struggle a little bit perhaps to find a suitable pedal reed for your Bach, because the only 16-foot reed is this massive wooden trombone, which is huge. And so forth. But in the restoration we are going to have the great double trumpet available as a pedal stop as well, though those reeds are going to be taken off that soundboard, put on their own soundboard so they can be used elsewhere. So you'd have your lighter reed. But yeah, it can play everything. Everything sounds great on this instrument, it really does.
And of course, very soon you're going to be switching this off for the last time in what's going to be about nearly 2 years.
Yeah, so we're going to have to find a whole new way of operating. We have a new digital replacement organ, so we're going to have to get to grips with that. But yes, it will be like an old friend going out. Can't wait to see it come back. It's going to be incredible.
Would you play just a short piece so for the last time we can actually hear at its current stage before we meet it again
Certainly.
In about 18 months' time?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much indeed.
That's a pleasure. Thank you.
It's Woman Composer Sunday on March the 10th. And what better way to mark this occasion than by talking to Anne Marsden-Thomas and Ghislaine Rees-Trapp about their recently published Oxford Book of Organ Music by women composers. But before we hear from them, have a listen to this, because it's unlikely you'll have ever heard it before, or indeed of its composer. This is a scherzo by a 19th century Nordic woman composer called Betsy Holmberg, which is one of 42 pieces by women composers featured in this book. And here it is, played for us by Anne Marsden-Thomas herself at the main organ of St Giles Cripplegate in London. So Ghislaine, what did you hope to achieve with this book?
So we wanted to celebrate and raise awareness of women composers because there's so much fantastic music out there that's never been given attention, some of it never been published before. We also wanted to encourage people to programme more diverse concert programmes, programme more diverse repertoire in services, because I think people often have really good intentions with this, but they don't know where to look. You know, I don't know how to diversify necessarily. So I think our book's very broad. It covers secular music, it covers sacred music. The standard as well of the pieces varies a lot. So hopefully there's something for everybody.
And this is a book that's got a repertoire going back, 500 years?
Yes, I was researching the historical pieces and I was determined to show the wide-ranging styles and the number of women who've been composing. After all, the first documented organist, did you know this was a woman?
No.
Yes,
really?
Yeah, 270 or so BC, Tice.
It begs the question, where have all the women been in that case? Why are there so few women composers?
Looking back into the past, women weren't educated at the same level as men for the most part. They didn't have the opportunities. If they did compose, they were usually discouraged from continuing after marriage. They had particular difficulty in publishing. Even the composers we've heard of were often told by publishers there's no point in publishing because no one will buy it. You're a woman. Women composers can't make it. And then lack of archiving. So there were certainly far, far more women composers in the past than we know about now, but they've been lost to us.
So in your research for the historical music in this book, Anne, did you have to use some quite ingenuitive ways of finding these manuscripts?
Well, in trying to get as wide a geographical range and chronological range of composers as possible, I deliberately went hunting on the internet for different countries, feeding in Finland, woman composer, for example. And it's amazing how many names came up. So a lot of people are out there doing this research. Yes, it was mostly researching on the internet, spending time in the British Library. You know, the British Library binds lots of pieces together in fat volumes. And one of the pieces, I just turned over the page from the piece I'd actually gone in to look at. And there was another piece which was actually of great value, and that's in the book too, by Alexandra Thompson. So it was fascinating. I was really sorry when the work finished.
But why are all these compositions by women in the British Library? Why are they in archives? Why have we not been playing them over the centuries?
I think there are lots of historical factors that make it complicated for women composers. Obviously, domestic pressures and, society's blocking membership for some women. And of course, it's not just a case of talent either. It's a case of patronage and, being in a suitable financial situation and having a support network. So I think that's meant that it's been difficult for women to be performed and published in the way that some men might have experienced, perhaps.
Absolutely. And the women that did make it did get their pieces published, which was, of course, a huge achievement. Often those pieces were just not archived afterwards. Music was just never stored or organised, collected in libraries and so on. So many women had an impact in their lifetimes and were promptly forgotten after they died. The pieces by Florence Price, for example, have only fairly recently been discovered in a dilapidated house. And I think they're still putting together the manuscripts and finding pieces which are worth playing.
I mean, is this, at this point, clear prejudice? Men were in charge of publishing, of performing. They just didn't regard compositions by women in that level of esteem to bother preserving them.
Absolutely, indisputably.
Really?
I mean, there's so much written evidence, men saying a woman can't compose, it's not suitable for a woman to compose. And of course, also, very often women composers stopped composing on marriage because their husbands didn't want them to be seen to need to earn a living.
And it's interesting as well because it seems to have seeped into the public consciousness so much that even in, women's papers and women's communication, for example, the Girls' Own newspaper in 1893, they say that playing the organ is not advisable. And they said that only strong, middle-aged, unmarried women should play the pedals. And any large instrument is risky for any woman. So there were definitely kind of health concerns from all sides about the impact that playing the organ might have on women.
Were you aware of this, or did you read that for the first time? I mean, that must be quite shocking, really, to come across something like that.
Yes, I think organ playing was considered okay for gentlewomen. This is spinsters, presumably. There were a fair number of them playing in churches and even composing. But, of course, a lot of women got past the publication and acceptance problem by being published just in gender-neutral names, either changing their name to a male name or just using an initial instead of their first name.
Really? I mean, is there an example of that in this book? Where women have had to basically pull a trick in order to get their work published?
There's a wonderful trio by Mrs. Philomonica. So she wasn't ashamed of being female, but she didn't want to be identified. Maybe her husband didn't want her identified as a composer. There are several composers in the book who were published just using their initial instead of their first name. Betsy Holmberg. She was originally published as just B. Holmberg. There's another composer in the book, Clementine de Bourges, 16th century female composer, who for years was known as Clément or Clémence de Bourges, and people just assumed that she was male. And in fact, I only Googled her yesterday and found that most of the websites referring to her refer to her as a female, but one or two still refer to her as a male. So there's obviously been a lot of confusion over the years.
When the both of you have been researching this work with a gender-specific agenda, have you noticed that there is nevertheless a distinctive voice that comes from a woman composer?
I do remember an afternoon we spent together where Anne had started researching the historical pieces, but we hadn't yet commissioned the contemporary pieces. And we played them all through, and we noticed that many were quiet and calm and gentle. Anne hadn't been looking for content of that kind, but it just had somehow ended up that way. And we made a very conscious decision from that point onwards, because we wanted the book to be very diverse, that when I approached the contemporary composers, we asked for ideally loud and celebratory music. And then I know, Anne, you in your research tried to find that kind of repertoire to contrast with the quieter pieces.
That proved quite challenging because a lot of women, especially 19th century English composers like Elizabeth Sterling, Anne Mountsie, wrote a lot of quiet preludes, feminine music, you might say, presumably for church services. So I rejected quite a lot of that.
But when you say feminine music, How do you describe, how can music be feminine?
Well, women were quite often criticised for writing music that was too feminine, too delicate and sweet, melodious, graceful. Other women were praised for writing music in that style because that was appropriate for ladies, and women were criticised for writing music that was much too virile, masculine, most unsuitable, and other women were praised for writing music in that style. So people have been trying to define music in gender terms for a very long time.
And presumably are things much better today, though, Ghislaine, because presumably we're a lot more aware of gender balance?
Yes and no. Certainly publishers seem really keen to publish more diverse repertoire, and performers too. I often have people get in touch asking for suggestions of different pieces because people are really keen to kind of explore the organ in a more modern way. It's not just traditional church music and the canon, but kind of reimagining the role of the organ. At the same time, I think we can't be complacent about this. Anne and I used to run the Society of Women Organists, Anne still does, and we did a survey back in 2022. We took a sample of 34 UK Anglican cathedrals, and we looked at the percentage of music by women composers in their repertoire lists in 1 week in May. I expected the percentage to be fairly low because, of course, the history of church music is very male and the kind of canon is very male. But I was quite shocked by the statistic we found, which was 1.9% of the repertoire in that week across those 34 cathedrals was by women. So I think that's an example of where we can't sit back. We need to be very proactive in, making sure that those pieces that we learn by female composers then go into our repertoire and are regularly performed.
And that's quite a challenge. I mean, are you quite dispirited by such low figures like that and the enormity of the task ahead?
That statistic certainly shocked me, but I think it's quite an exciting challenge that we have in the sense that so many people seem to be on board and things are definitely changing.
I feel quite optimistic too because we've got many powerful people who've joined the membership of the Society of Women Organists, and I think they will help to swing the balance. Some of them in the cathedral world. I think the points of resistance will gradually melt away.
And how do you want people to engage with this? Is it people to make a conscious effort to play music written by women composers that have been forgotten, or is this a book of good organ music?
I think it's both. I think we need to be really purposeful about programming music by women composers because I think it's all too easy to be complacent and assume someone else is doing it, things are improving, I don't need to worry about this too much. And so each of us has a responsibility to move things forward. At the same time, Anne and I obviously picked these pieces because we thought they were really enjoyable pieces and varied, and hopefully a lot of people get lots out of them.
And have you exhausted the archives, or is there more to come?
Well, I believe that there's much more to explore on the internet. We don't have an archive of pieces ready for publishing into the next volume, but who knows, watch this space. I'm very aware of colleagues who are busy compiling books of women composers for organ, so it's an exciting future.
Anne Marsden-Thomas, Ghislaine Rees-Trapp, thank you very much. Well, Anne very kindly recorded another piece of music from this book, a very short but beautiful little piece of music by the 16th century composer Clémentine de Bourges. Richard Gowers is a former organ scholar of King's College, Cambridge, and is now Director of Music at St George's Church, Hanover Square in London, where he's enjoying a career that's rapidly expanding in many directions. He's in demand not just as an organist, but as a keyboard player with orchestras such as the Royal Philharmonic and the BBC and London Symphony Orchestras, as well as being a regular accompanist to the BBC Singers and London Symphony Chorus. And last year made his conducting debut with the Academy of Ancient Music. Well, to find out how he's managed to do all of this, I met up with Richard at his church in London and began by asking him where his love of music first started.
My parents kept a little report about me when I was born, which I once read many years later, and they said they'd coined me as musical when I was a few weeks old. I think because the Goldberg variations put me to sleep, which was indeed what they were written for.
So your first memory is the Goldberg?
That's the memory. Little bit too young for that, I think, but I think my parents valued that piece because it would shut me up.
And when did the organ come into it then? When did you think, aha, this is the instrument for me?
Well, in a way, that's quite a bit later into the story. I suppose from the age of 5, I was learning the piano, and then at 6, we all moved to America because I come from an academic family, and we went and my parents worked at Princeton University for 2 years. And that took me up to the age of 7. And then came back to my hometown of Cambridge and started attending King's College School, which is the school where the choristers go. And then at some point halfway through that year, my parents had certainly not had any intention of putting me into the choir, but some boy in my music class was humming, and the teacher said, stop humming please, but if you really enjoy doing that or you enjoy singing, then we do have some chorister trials coming up next week, so you might like to go in for the choir. And I don't think he did, but a light bulb popped in my head, and I went home and just said to my dad, I think I'd like to audition to be a chorister. And I think he thought it was such a weird thing for a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old to turn up back at home saying, that he decided to take it seriously, and he started training me up to sing a hymn, and we went and had a consultation with Stephen Cleobury, and then it all sort of happened. And so at one point in the summer holidays when I was about 10, I said to my mum that I wanted to think about learning the organ. She must have noted that down, because I then thought nothing of it after I'd said that. And then the rest of the weeks of the summer went past, and I was back at school in the first week, and the head of music said, I'm going to introduce you to your organ teacher now. And I thought, hang on, I don't remember really agreeing to this, it was just an idea. But then I started to learn with Nigel Carey, who's the organist of the big Catholic church in Cambridge, and those lessons were my favourite part of the week always. And we would work towards each term the end of term school service in King's Chapel, where they would let us each play a little piece we'd learnt. And for me at that age, that felt like the most massive thing in the world, to go and play a 1 minute long piece from the Orgelbuch line in King's Chapel, and I'd spend weeks dreaming about it in advance and things.
So from that early age, you then thought, I want to be the organ scholar at King's College, Cambridge?
Yeah, I suppose so. And there was a chorister in the year above me, Tom Etheridge, who was already very much saying that he wanted to go back, and I just thought that seemed like a good idea. And in the end, both of us did go back a few years later, and it was I think the only time that they've had 2 ex-choristers together as the organ scholars.
You got the role of the organ scholar there. Was it what you expected?
I suppose, having known the place as a chorister, there weren't too many surprises. The thing that was more unfamiliar was your role training choristers, and that involved quite a bit of guesswork, really. I was 19 years old and put in a side room with some 8-year-olds and sort of had to start them off on the entire process of becoming a chorister, and it was guesswork for all of us.
Did you not have help from Stephen Cleobury? Did he not take you aside and say, right, this is what you need to do to begin?
He was pretty hands-off about it, and so I had a little bit of guidance from the other organ scholar, but otherwise it was just using my common sense and training them quite a lot with sight reading, a little bit of vocal technique, although they had a proper singing teacher for that, and teaching them to read psalms and get used to learning intervals, and essentially get onto that core skill of just being able to learn a huge amount of music and get the conveyor belt moving.
Did you actually appreciate where you were, what you had achieved to get that far?
I think I certainly appreciated where I was. I remember when I was in my first month or so, one of the older choral scholars in his final year noticed me admiring the chapel, and he said, oh, you'll get used to it. It'll become normal after a while. And I really thought, almost defiantly, no, I don't think I am going to get used to this. I think it will always be special. And actually something about the building and the way that it has those beautiful windows and the light is always different each time you're in there actually means that it keeps surprising you. And you form a strange relationship with the building as organ scholar there, because you're often there on your own in the darkness or practicing at all kinds of times of day. I think it helps a lot if you love being there.
Now, it sounds lovely, but presumably it's quite a pressurised role. I mean, you are the epitome of excellence, really, if you are the King's College organ scholar.
It's certainly pressurised internally. I mean, the public perception is a little bit difficult to have a permanent sense of that. I think it was much more about what the director of music wanted from you and those sorts of expectations, also from the rest of the choir and some of the regular people who would come and listen. The excellence, I suppose, is something that's just carried down from year to year, and you come in and the people who are a couple of years older than you are already aspiring to that and trying to come as close as they can, and so you enter a culture and you're pretty much stuck with it, and it's a mixture of having to play things to a very high level and also having to play an enormous amount of music. The first term, I think, was pretty tricky, and then it got a little easier as it went on. And then towards the end, I suppose I'd played most of the core repertoire, so I wasn't learning as much new stuff, and I was more familiar with how the instrument worked and more confident, and so things got easier and more comfortable as they went on. And then when I felt very comfortable in my third year, then it was time to leave.
I mean, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard, in terms of the pressure, if the organ scholar had made a mistake or played a wrong note, you had to go down and apologise to Stephen Cleobury. Is that true?
That is true, yeah. I'm not sure if I always did, because you never quite know whether a mistake you've made has actually been noticed, but
I bet it was
a bit of devil's advocate
there.
Oh, I had a horrible time though when the Watson and E Nunctimitis, which has a famously easy organ introduction. You just play about 6 notes in a scale quite slowly, so it's a bit of a joke because it's so easy. And there were legendary stories of people messing it up, and I remember just before playing it during the second lesson of an evensong, making a joke to the other organ scholar about messing it up. And then because of my lack of focus, I then accidentally played it twice the speed it was supposed to be. The scariest thing was Stephen then came up to play the voluntary at the end of that service, so there was no escape whatsoever. And he came up, we said nothing because the service was going on, he played his voluntary, and then I launched into my apology afterwards, and he said, well, he apologised for his performance of the voluntary as well, which was something by Messiaen, and I had no idea whether it was being played well or not, to be honest. But he seemed equally ashamed of it, and so we were, in fact, quits. But of course I had to wait till the piece had ended to know that, and sitting there quaking in my boots.
And what was the working relationship with him? Was it difficult? Do you think you learned from him? How was it?
I think you learn from him because he had such a clear vision of what he wanted that you simply aspire to match it, and there wasn't very much flexibility, there wasn't very much compromise as well, so if you didn't manage to get there, then things could be difficult, or certainly feel difficult. And the added dynamic for me was that I'd known him as a child as well, and it's quite difficult to rewrite the way you perceive someone a few years later, even though it feels more like a working relationship. And so I never lost the kind of childlike respect that I had, which I think served me well, because it meant I always took it very seriously and was able to take what I learnt beyond into the professional world, where I've rarely met someone with quite such a high sense of expectation.
And when you were there, you're in your final year, your third year, did you think that there was, a career path laid out for you as virtue of being a King's organ scholar?
Well, I think it's easy to inherit a bit of a sense of entitlement with that, because it can feel like a big label. I think the red carpet isn't just sort of rolled out for you after you leave. It's more that what I found in the London freelance scene is that there's a lot of referral, there's a lot of recommendations, and if people need a bit of information about you, then they could very quickly say about me that I was a King's organ scholar, and that would usually reassure people if they were booking me as a stranger. But I had my fair share of applying for jobs and not getting them. And
I mean, did you know what you wanted to do? I mean, is it presumably a straightforward cathedral route that when you leave that sort of position, did you have a clear plan in your mind of what you were going to do at that point?
Well, as for the cathedral route, I think it seems to have fallen out of fashion a bit for King's organ scholars. There hasn't been a King's organ scholar leaving King's and going into cathedral music for quite a number of years. There are plenty who are in cathedral music now who were at King's, but none who left recently. The beauty of being there was that it was also part of a vibrant university with a lot of music going on. And I made a lot of that other music my life while I was there, particularly because in the third year I felt more comfortable with the duties of the organ scholarship. And actually particularly also because in my second year, I had a bit of a weird time. In my second year, the organ disappeared for 9 months for a massive restoration. And so I was playing a bit of chamber organ, a bit of piano in the services, but not having to practice nearly as much. And that was actually a great time to throw myself into a lot of other student music making, playing piano, getting involved in opera. Much of the time, that was the most enjoyable part of my Cambridge experience.
So when your time came to leave King's, you actually continued in education and started with the piano.
Yeah, I had a teacher who ran a leader scheme in Cambridge already, Joseph Middleton. And I did that scheme for 2 years. And he was someone who turned piano accompaniment for me from something in which you can read music and someone shoves some sheets in front of you and then you go and do a concert with them, into realising that it really is an interpretative art form for the pianist as well. And so that completely opened up a new musical world for me. And he encouraged me then to pursue that at the Royal Academy of Music. I suppose that then gave me an idea of something to do afterwards. And actually in my third year, I've been really sort of pursuing all the things I was doing in Cambridge right up to Christmas. And then after that, massive 9 lessons and carols. That's a sort of real checkpoint moment, I suppose, in your time there. Then the new year rolled around and there was a little bit of a crisis feeling of not having a plan, not having a job to go to. And at that point, it was when he recommended applying for that course.
But a different technique, presumably.
Yeah, which I needed. I mean, my other kind of crisis towards the end of the Cambridge time was that I was developing wrist problems that at certain points got so bad that I could barely play and certainly not practice either. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to play enough to work as a musician, sort of slightly have that feeling of your life flashing before your eyes and thinking, now might actually be the time to think of what else I might do if it weren't this.
So it was that bad, and you thought, that's it,
Yeah, there were certainly times when it was, there were times when it was really bad. I was wearing these weird wrist braces, I was dipping my arms in warm water, doing all these sort of strange bits of advice people were offering on the internet and things, and really all it came down to was just moving my shoulders back a bit. And
was it the piano then at the Academy that gave you, that's where that was sort of rectified?
Yes, I think to a pretty large extent, because what I did in those 2 years was also completely relearning piano technique from the basics. And although this was a master's level course, I was having a style of lesson that could be taught to someone at any level, including beginner. It was just how you apply the finger to the key, or the arm weight to the key, in fact, as it was.
And did that affect the way you play the organ? I mean, do you play the organ as a pianist now?
I think it completely affected it. Whether it's as simple as playing it as a pianist, I don't know. I've been told by people that I look as if I'm playing the piano when I play the organ, and I find that very flattering when they say that. But on the piano, it's all about using and varying weight to affect the sound, and of course you can't affect the sound in the same way on an organ, but you can in fact do more than perhaps I realised previously. And there's certainly a lot about efficiency. I used to be an organist who would sit very still to play and almost pride myself in the minimal movement used. And now I think completely in an opposite direction and think, how can I make my fingers work as little as possible and share the work round through the arms and the body in a way that a pianist might do to throw body weight into the keys.
So you're a better organist with a piano technique then?
100%.
Really?
Yeah.
You'd advise that, actually, that it's the piano technique that's key to playing the organ better?
Definitely. Completely now part of my musical identity.
I mean, in the last sort of 10 months, a year alone, you've been doing proms, you've been playing, organ and piano with, things like the London Symphony, the Royal Philharmonic, you've been under the baton of Sir Simon Rattle, extraordinary opportunities. Would you link a lot of that to broadening out your musical experience?
Yeah, I mean, essentially I'd refer to myself now as a spare keyboard player, which essentially means, or what I mean at least, is somebody who plays all keyboard instruments and has the kind of keyboard skills to be able to sit down and do things at the drop of a hat and can be very helpful in a lot of different contexts. I can't really remember what my route in was. It's usually illness and people having a crisis at the last minute, and then asking around, and they ask their usual people who can't do it, and those people then start to suggest strangers. And in early 2018, I got a random call saying, can you come and play piano in the Stravinsky Symphony of Psalms for LPO this weekend? I was a little bit naughty and I cancelled another concert because I really wanted to do it. And that was my in with one orchestra. And now I've, on the side of lots of other things, become like a lot of instrumentalists, just somebody who freelances playing in all of the London orchestras when they need someone, whether that be organ or celeste or other keyboards.
But you're still studying.
Yes, I keep forgetting about that, but I am studying in Stuttgart. This is with Nathan Lauber, the great virtuoso American organist, who's maybe the organist I admire the most, and also a good friend. He's not hugely older than me, maybe 6 or 7 years older. He was somebody who really sort of gave me a bit of a shake and encouraged me to pursue organ just to a higher level. Because what I'd found a little bit from leaving King's and going into professional world and pursuing piano a bit more was that my organ playing had perhaps plateaued, and there was more to learn. And so he had started his job in Stuttgart as the new professor of organ there and was trying to gather a class from around Europe, and invited me to apply to do the Concertexamen course, which is a course essentially of just lessons, and you can do it as a commuter as well.
And this is a specific qualification that you think you need?
Well, in all honesty, I was more interested in the lessons than the qualification, but from having gone out there and talked to some of the German students and other people learning there, I've realised that actually it is a qualification that's valued in Germany, in the German-speaking countries. And I've never had a qualification from actually studying the organ before, because I studied musicology and then piano accompaniment. And so in their eyes, I'm not an organist at all.
And of course, here we are in St George's Church, Hanover Square, very famous church in London, where you are the organist. And remarkably so, you're the 12th organist here to hold the post in nearly 300 years.
That's it, yes. We have our tercentenary coming up very soon, and nobody quite knows exactly when to measure those 300 years from.
But it means you can't leave I mean, it's not a temporary post then.
No,
You've got to
I'm
be
gonna
here for
leave
50
probably-
years or something.
I've decided to leave in 2050, because then I'll have done the average length of 27 years and will be net zero by then, so that's a nice round number.
You've inherited a Baroque sounding, it's a new American-built organ, very different from King's.
A landmark instrument, I'd describe it. It's got enough musical compromises on to be able to do all the choral music that we would want to do, but it is also a specialist instrument for the North German Baroque style, and that sets it apart in this country. And it's built by an American builder, Richard Fowkes, who specialise in that, because in America they have this great culture of building essentially pastiche historic instruments. And it's been the perfect instrument to implement for me the things I've been learning from Nathan in my studies in Stuttgart. He was the person who really pushed me to apply for this job, because he knew the organ and knew what good things it could do, both to help me to learn and also to give me an opportunity to make interesting things happen. I'd be the first person to say what a brilliant organ it is at King's, and if I go back there, I completely fall in love with it all over again. But actually, it was a luxury instrument to play. You had all these colours at your disposal that we would really aspire to use. But in terms of the playing, it has the kinds of keys that really spring right back up once you've played them to make it as mistake-proof as possible. And it's rather nice to come to an organ like this one at St George's that doesn't have such a safety net. And you do really have to concentrate your touch and play with real precision. And you can then take the precision that you've worked at and play that anywhere. And I'd much rather regularly play an instrument that teaches you and demands something of you, and then perhaps go somewhere where it's easier to play, than have it the other way around, where it's a luxury every day and then you struggle to play when the instrument helps you less.
And do you have plans? I mean, could you imagine yourself in an older life going back to somewhere like King's?
Yes, perhaps. I think I could imagine that simply because of the nostalgia and my great love for the place. I think for now, I'm not planning too hard. I'm allowing things to unfold and enjoying seeing where it goes. There's going to come a point for me, perhaps after a few years, where I'm no longer doing that many things for the first time. And some of the people 20, 15 years older than me who passed on quite a lot of work to me and then left probably came to that feeling of actually being a little exhausted by the freelancing and wanting to do something different. And so I could imagine that happening as well.
So is there one thing now you think that's going to be the constant?
I think I'll always be playing recitals.
The organ.
Yeah.
I mean, that's your principle.
Yeah.
Still.
But I think I'll never be ready to sacrifice everything else to do that.
Great. Richard Gowers, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's it for now. As always, do subscribe to catch the next episode when I'll be listening to Darius Batiwala as he improvises to a 1920s silent horror film. I talk to the new director of music at Sheffield Cathedral, Tom Daggett, to find out how he's rebuilding the choral tradition there. And I meet blind organist David Liddell to learn how he reads music through Braille and hear about his many encounters with some legendary French organists. So until then, from me, Mark O'Brien, goodbye.